Now, a 5-minute history of the Permanent Fund. A good place to start is 1959. Alaska was a brand new state with a brand new constitution. The idea behind the Permanent Fund can be found in Article 8, Section 2, which says,
"The legislature shall provide for the utilization, development, and conservation of all natural resources belonging to the state, including land and waters, for the maximum benefit of its people."
This provision of our Constitution explains why the Permanent Fund belongs to the people of Alaska and why the people are entitled to share in its earnings.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Fast forward to 1969. Man had just walked on the moon, and the state of Alaska was sky high as well. Our Treasury received $900 million in one day by auctioning off the right to drill for oil at Prudhoe Bay. The big question facing Alaska was, should we spend the money or save the money? $900 million was a huge amount of money, 8 times more than the entire state government spent in 1968. After considerable debate, Alaskans decided to spend the money for basic community needs, like water and sewer, roads, airports, schools, and the like. So these projects were built, but soon the cash was gone. People began to ask whether the money had been spent wisely or wasted. By the 1970s, Alaskans were becoming increasingly convinced that it would be smart to take at least a portion of the future oil wealth and save it rather than spend it. Through the political process, this popular idea was turned into a ballot proposition, which was placed before the voters in the 1976 general election. By a margin of 2-1, the people of Alaska voted to amend the state constitution and create a permanent fund. 4 months later, February 28, 1977, the Permanent Fund received its first deposit of dedicated oil revenues, $734,000. Today, it's not uncommon for the fund to gain or lose that amount in a matter of minutes. In August of 1977, oil began to flow through the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, and a new debate raged in our state. What would be the mission of the fund? Although there was no shortage of ideas, the public seemed to be divided between 2 concepts. The first concept was to use the fund as a development bank. The fund would be used to help new and existing businesses in Alaska. This would broaden the economy, create more jobs, and make Alaska less dependent on oil revenues in the future by developing other sources of income for the state. The second concept was to consider the fund as a savings account or public trust. This would give Alaska something it had never had, a nest egg the state could fall back on during tough times. As a trust, its main mission would be to protect the principal and grow the fund. This way, non-renewable resources such as oil would continue to provide revenue to the state years after they were used up. Finally, in 1980, the legislature ended the debate. They decided that the Permanent Fund would be a savings account and would be managed as a public trust. The trust would be invested very conservatively in order to protect the principal and achieve modest growth. There would be no preference for Alaska investments. The fund would seek the best opportunities inside and outside the state. Also in 1980, the legislature approved a special $900 million deposit to the Permanent Fund to make up for the $900 million that was spent in 1969. The legislature also approved the first version of the Permanent Fund dividend program, which was later ruled unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1982, a constitutionally acceptable Permanent Fund dividend program was enacted, and $1,000 checks were mailed to all qualified Alaska residents. Also, for the first time, the legislature adopted inflation proofing, adding money from the earnings reserve back into the principal of the fund. In 1983, the Permanent Fund made its first investments in the stock market and in commercial real estate. The dividend that year, $386.15. In 1984, the assets of the Permanent Fund reached $5 billion. By 1989, the fund reached $10 billion. In 1993, $15 billion. And in 1996, the fund's value surpassed $20 billion. And in 1998, for the first time, the Permanent Fund brings more money into state coffers than oil revenues.